Merkel has been a central figure in European politics in her 16 years as Chancellor of Germany. How did a pastor's daughter turned physicist from East Germany rise to lead one of the world's foremost democracies? Famous for avoiding media attention and speaking about her personal life, Merkel doesn't exactly make that an easy question to answer. With acclaim and criticism alike coming from around the world, how will she be remembered? Fortunately, this exceptional woman has been matched by an exceptional biographer. Good evening and welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. I'm Liz Brailsford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Our program tonight, features Kati Marton, author of The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel. Joining us to moderate this discussion is Amanda Schnetzer, founder of a tech startup in the mental health space called First Then. You can purchase your copy of The Chancellor at Interrobang Books, our local bookstore partner. This would make a wonderful holiday gift. So get your copies today at interrobangbooks.com. And don't forget, as we approach the holiday season, that a council membership makes a fabulous gift as well. You can visit our website at dfwworld.org for more information on that. Joining us tonight to moderate is Amanda Schnetzer. Amanda has 20 years of experience in international affairs and public policy. She was a researcher and program director at the American Enterprise Institute in DC, then became senior fellow and director of studies at the Freedom House in New York City, and later served as president of the Dallas Committee on Foreign Relations. She also worked at George W. Bush Presidential Center, founding and directing the Bush Institute's Human Freedom Initiative, and as COO of Point Bello, a global markets intelligence consultancy. Amanda is a graduate of Georgetown in DC and Southern Methodist University and is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I know with the two of these remarkable women, we are in for an excellent conversation with that. Take it away, Amanda. Thank you both very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Kati. It's great to be with the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Always, the staff works incredibly hard behind the scenes to make these programs possible, and they've done it against sometimes impossible odds under conditions of COVID-19. So I really thank them all and wish them well. Well, so Kati Marton, let me do a brief introduction and then we'll dive in. Our guest and distinguished author tonight is Kati Marton, highly acclaimed author, biographer, former NPR and ABC News correspondent. She was born in Budapest and has pursued profession in journalism, but also in human rights. She previously served as the chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists, a wonderful organization that serves the rights of journalists around the world. And she won the George Foster Peabody Award for Human Rights Activism and Journalism. Her book, Enemies of the People, My Family's Journey to America, was a finalist selection in the National Book Critics Circle Awards. And tonight, we are here to talk about another remarkable book and the latest of hers, The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel. Kati Marton, welcome virtually, at least to Dallas. We hope you'll come in person soon.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm thrilled to be there, and thank you, Liz, as well. I would prefer to be there in person. Call me old-fashioned, but I still like in-person events better. But thank you for having me, and well, we have a great deal to talk about. Because Merkel is indeed a far more interesting person than she would like us to believe.
Well, I would like to begin on what may sound like a strange topic, but it is an interesting one, I think, in the context of this book, and that is about footnotes. This book has some of the most fascinating footnotes I have ever read, and it is because you have offered personal anecdotes and stories to connect your own family's history, particularly your own family's history of life under communist rule and journey out of communist rule, to the story of Angela Merkel's life and rise. Could you talk a little bit about those dots that you connect in these fascinating footnotes, and why your own family's history may have inspired you to take on this enormous task of the biography of Angela Merkel?
You know, that's so interesting. This book has been out now for 2 weeks, and I've had an intense series of interviews because everybody's interested in this very mysterious, enigmatic, most private public person in the world. But you're the first to ask me about those footnotes, so thank you. I was trying to be very low key about my personal involvement in this story because of course she's the main event and she deserves a full biography. But I guess if I had an advantage in being her biographer, it's that I had a childhood which was not that different from hers. I grew up in Soviet-occupied Hungary. I was the child of political prisoners. My mother and father were imprisoned when I was 6 years old for charged with espionage for the crime of being good reporters. That's the origin of my involvement with the Committee to Protect Journalists many years later, because I care deeply about press freedom. You know, having experienced my own parents' arrest. So I know that that Chancellor Merkel read my my autobiography, the story of my parents, enemies of the people, as they were called by the Soviet regime. And so she was maybe a little bit less adverse to my project than to others. She didn't treat me quite the same way as she would have, let's say, another American author, which is what I am. Nevertheless, she is a part of her secret of 16 years longevity. I mean, remarkable. Think about that, longer than FDR, who served for 12 years, and we consider that to be incredibly long in power. 16 years, and she leaves office now with a 80% approval rating, and the respect of the world. Really, a recent Pew survey found her to be the most admired leader in the world. So no lame duck is she, and which is quite remarkable, given how short people's attention spans are these days. So I think part of the secret of her sustaining that level of support and respect is the fact that she draws a line between her public and private sides and keeps something to herself that is just hers. It's, you know, there's so many lessons for all of us in this book, in her story, not only for women, but for anybody who's interested in how to, not only how to gain power, but how to hold on to power, which is the tricky part. So not only was she elected the first woman chancellor of a country that is unique in Europe for never having had a queen, but elected 4 times. So worth carefully studying her trajectory and her superpowers.
Maybe tell us then, given all of that, what was it like to actually research and write this biography of a sitting head of state? And we've got a question in the chat that I'll add to this, which is, have you received any comments from her or her staff about the book? Or what? And I'll add to that, what was it like perhaps to interact with her or her staff in the writing of the book?
Yes, such good questions. So the answer to your first question is extremely challenging to write a biography of someone who's still in office and powerful, and opposed to any biography being written about her. She had an authorized biographer who has quit because he didn't get a full sit down with her. So challenging, but you know what? I've been doing this kind of work for, well, this is my 10th book, and before that, I was, as Liz mentioned, I was an NPR and ABC correspondent. So I used every skill that I ever learned as a journalist, and did it the old-fashioned way, which is going to every place that she ever lived, looking for anybody who still had memories of her, from her high school teachers to her university PhD sponsor, to mentors in German political and in Washington as well, because she had American mentors too, and I'm sure we'll get to that. She had actually quite a few Republican supporters, and by the way, has a very warm relationship to George W. Bush. The chemistry between them was really quite remarkable, and quite a surprise for me in my research. So the dogged, old-fashioned reporting, and bit by bit, and I set out to capture the human story, which is which it comes as news to a lot of Germans too. I mean, I'm sometimes asked by Germans, does the Chancellor have grandchildren? I mean, can you imagine having?
Because she doesn't have children, right?
Well, I mean, that people don't even know that about her. Yeah. She does have stepchildren and step grandchildren, and she considers them her own, but she has never exploited her family for her political gain, and neither of her parents, nor, now both deceased, nor her two living siblings have ever given an interview about their famous sister. I mean, just think about that level of control and that level of privacy is unheard of in our social mediatic age. But I think it is part of the secret of the fact that she's not worn out, because throughout her political life, she's lived another life. You know, she loves music. She loves to cook. She's not a great cook, according to many people who've sampled her potato soup, but she loves to cook, and loves to have people over to her little house. It's really a modest little cottage that she retreats to. By the way, no politician ever gets invited to her house. She prefers the company of creative people, musicians, filmmakers, playwrights, actors, opera stars. She has her own, that too is part of her, the private chancellor, and I spent quite a bit of time interviewing those people who are not as intimidated by her no interviews with anyone rule, which applies to most German politicians. I mean, she has cut people off for disclosing a 2-line email. Thanks for the suggestion. I cite that. One former member of her circle once released a memo that released an email from the chancellor saying, "Thanks for this suggestion, AM." He was never heard from again. So it was a tricky business, capturing the private Merkel, but well, you've read the book.
I have. And I mean, given what you just said, it's actually quite remarkable the level of detail and almost warmth you're able to bring to her story. And I would love to pursue some of what I've decided to call kind of Angela Merkel's personas. One of those is daughter. And if we could talk a little bit about her life growing up in East Germany,
Yes.
About her parents, and particularly the influence that her father had on her life, and to what extent that sort of has shaped her worldview.
Absolutely. So she was raised in East Germany, which had the harshest regime in the Soviet bloc. There were more informants per capita in East during the Soviet era than during the Third Reich. So during the Gestapo era. So she grew up in full knowledge that the people around her could not be trusted, and that lack of trust has really impacted on her governing style too. She she learned early to keep her own counsel, and this too has helped her in her political life. But along with that. Sense of insecurity in a police state, which was her first 35 years were spent in the so-called Stasi state of East Germany. She was also the child of a Lutheran pastor from whom she imbibed this deep sense of responsibility and the need to help those less fortunate than herself. In the vicarage in which she grew up in the Brandenburg province of East Germany, there were a lot of handicapped children and adults, and for her that was completely normal. She didn't see anything extraordinary about sharing her birthday parties with handicapped kids. I once attended a church event. She feels very at home in churches because that was her childhood as the pastor's daughter. And for once I really caught the unguarded Angela Merkel in full flight. She was interacting with handicapped people at this church event, and completely natural, completely at ease, sampling canapes prepared by them. And she has a deep sense of responsibility, which really came through, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but the origins are in her childhood as the pastor's daughter. During the refugee crisis, when it was during the 2015 refugee crisis, when she allowed 1 million, mostly Middle Eastern refugees fleeing the never-ending wars of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria to enter Germany, and by the way, they have mostly been assimilated and have. The entire refugee story is a back burner issue for Germany. So she has provided the world a template for how to cope with the single biggest humanitarian crisis of our time, and it's not going away, which is the migration crisis. So anyway, I fast forwarded that to 2015 because it was really 2015 that made me want to write this book, because until then, like most people, I thought, a rather dull figure. And then observing what she was doing and managing and getting away with at a time when most European countries were throwing up walls and unspooling barbed wire to keep them out, I thought, wow, who is this person, and what's her story? And that's really when I started working on it. And I'm a refugee myself. I was a little kid when my parents dragged me across the Austro-Hungarian frontier. But you know, like Merkel, who also considers herself a refugee, because although she didn't leave her country of East Germany, the country collapsed under her, and therefore all that was familiar to her was gone, and that's a definition of a refugee. So you can see I identified on many levels with her saga, as she identifies with refugees.
Fascinating. You write that in 1981, as a budding physicist, Angela Merkel made a trip to Poland, and at that time was introduced to the Solidarity movement. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, and to what extent do you think that sort of served as a spark or the spark for her interest in politics and the ultimate transition she made from academia and research to politics?
Well, first of all, this is a delightful picture which shows her with her future husband, who is also a scientist, and it shows the young Angela as this completely natural, almost androgynous young woman who was completely unself-conscious and irresistible to people who were in her orbit, because she was so smart. People never got over her brilliance. I interviewed her professors who said that she was always the best in every class, and could have chosen any field. She chose science because science was a relatively safe place for her to park her superior intellect during the Stasi, during the secret police regime, because science is hard to manipulate and distort. But throughout her career as a physicist, which came to an end when the wall came down in 1989, which gave her start, her second life, she'd always been interested in politics. It was just that there was no opportunity for her. And so she was very inspired by what was going on in Poland under Lech Walesa, the Solidarność movement. And she was inspired by Gorbachev and just waiting for the incredibly corrupt East German state to collapse, which it ultimately did. And she's a very cautious person, famously so, but she has throughout her career, when something opens up, she seizes the moment and goes for it. So once the wall came down in 1989, she was kind of walking around her East Berlin neighborhood, and there were all these political startups. You know, there was so much excitement and opportunity in the air because the old regime was fast disappearing. And she walked into this political startup called Democratic Awakening, and she liked the name, and she noticed that there were some crates in the corner that had been unopened, and she rolled up her sleeves and opened the crates, and they were computers, gift of some Western donor. And no one else in that startup had a clue about computers or how to assemble them. Well, Merkel did, because she was a scientist. So she put them together, and that was her entry into political life. The next day she came back and they offered her a seat at the table. And then she became spokesperson for the party. And eventually, and not too far in the distance, she was brought to the attention of the titanic figure of German unification, Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who was a gigantic figure in every way possible, including physically, spotted her and made her the youngest minister in his cabinet, Minister for Youth and Women, because he needed a woman in an all-male cabinet, and he needed someone from the East. And she was not particularly interested in either women or children, but she bided her time, as she always does. She knows how to wait things out. And her next post was already a far more consequential one as Minister for Environment. Mm-hmm. And that was something where she really came into her own and got to know, there she is, got to know a lot of Western leaders who later, for example, Henry Kissinger, who became a mentor, a friend and a mentor to this day, and Hank Paulson, and Helmut Kohl, like so many powerful men, totally underestimated her, which is one of her power moves, is to have people underestimate her. It's fine with her if you underestimate her, because that's how she gains power. So he underestimated her, and to his peril, because when he was caught in a kickback scandal, because he was such an enormously influential figure, no one else in his party, the Christian Democratic Party, had the courage to tell him that for the sake of his party and for the sake of the country, he had to exit the stage now. Mm-hmm. Merkel did, and she did it in almost ruthlessly. She wrote an op-ed in a newspaper that every German reads, saying, "It's time to go, Mr. Chancellor, it's time to go," and ended her mentor's career. Mm-hmm. Some people might call that rather a brutal act for a protege, but she demonstrated that she knew how to wield power, and she demonstrated that she was unsentimental, and cleared the way for her eventual entry into the chancellery. And Kohl was not the last powerful man to underestimate her. And it's again, one of the lessons from this book is that it's remarkable how much you can get done if you don't take credit for what you're doing, if you let others take credit for it. And that has been the theme of her career, as she, in the last 16 years, has more or less transformed German society, made it more open, more tolerant, and made it a multicultural society, and made, for example, marriage equality the law of the land, and opened up space for women without ever giving a speech about that. She just, partly by power of her example, and the fact that she surrounds herself with other powerful women. She likes the company of women. I have to say that as a woman writing about her, I felt that I had a slight advantage in that regard too. You just feel it when another woman, gives you that sense of, I don't know, some sympathy and compassion. That we're all, ultimately we're all sisters here. It's a good feeling. But she is a master at wielding power, which of course became essential for the West during her turbulent decade and a half. The crises just never stopped.
Well, maybe as a backdrop to those crises, which I do want to get into, there's so many kind of
Yes.
defining moments, you could call it. But I'd love to read just a very short passage from the book. For those of you in the audience, if you've got your book, it's page 77 on the, and this is about what you called her set of core values that she brought to office. I think it's an enormously important passage as sort of a backdrop to her as a leader. So I quote, "Rather than a program or specific policies, Merkel brought a set of core values to the office: her deep but private faith, an unshakable creed of duty and service, a belief in Germany's permanent debt to Jews for what she has always referred to as the Shoah, her scientist's devotion to precise, evidence-based decision-making, and a visceral loathing of dictators who imprison their own people." I think that's quite a powerful paragraph. Could you talk about that a bit and how that, in a sense, sort of frames her approach to leadership?
Geez, that is powerful. Did I write that?
Yes, you did.
I like that. I've never had anybody else read it to me. Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, so those, she's not a programmatic, she's not an ideological person. She is the opposite of an ideologue. She is a deal maker. She likes to find common ground. She even an inch of common ground is for her worth staying at the table for 15 hours, as she has done in a stretch with Putin. For example, when he invaded Ukraine, and the first cross-border invasion since the Second World War, if you discount the Balkan Wars, which were more internal. Putin sent his military into a foreign country, and without Merkel, he would have kept going. Obama, who was who couldn't stand Putin and said, "I can't deal with somebody who's constantly lying to me." Well, Putin was lying to her too, but she had the understanding of what Putin was all about, because Putin and Merkel are products of the same system, except they came out with different conclusions. For Putin, the greatest catastrophe
Very
of the
different
20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. For Merkel, there they are, the two of them. He never stops trying to shake her equanimity, her balance. So at their first meeting, because as you know, he's a former KGB operative, and he knows every trick in the book, but she knows every trick that he's onto. So he gave her the KGB staring contest, and she did not blink. And then another time he unleashed his large black Labrador, knowing that she has a real fear of dogs, having twice been bitten. And again, she just froze. She did not react. Her power move when a bully tries to shake her up is just not to react. So same thing with Trump, with whom she had 4 extremely frustrating and pretty much fruitless years, because at the outset she thought that he was interested in making deals as a former businessman, but she pretty soon she learned that he really wasn't, that he was a showman. That one of my favorite pictures in my book is of Merkel leaning into Trump is sitting there with his arms crossed. I don't know if we've got that, if we can show that on the screen. And Merkel is ringed by all the other male leaders of the Western Alliance, who are all standing back, and Merkel is leaning in. And there we go. Yeah, I love that picture. That picture really says it. You know, she became the defender of the West against Trump and against Putin and against a whole cast of authoritarians, including Erdogan of Turkey and Xi Jinping of China, with whom she has spent more time than any other Western leader. She since 2005 she identified China as the kind of looming challenge for the West, and she's never stopped trying to level the playing field between China and the West. But so I mean, I've skipped over a great deal because I know we have people who have questions, but she has this unique combination of the grounding in science, which means that she masters issues and facts at a level that the other heads of state cannot match. She doesn't. I've observed her in some situations where she's always very calm. She doesn't threaten. She doesn't use charm. She just is better prepared than anyone else at the table, and that is how she gets things done, because they come in full of hot air and bluster, and she's got the facts, and she's unshakable. And because she spent so much time studying men, because she was almost always the only woman in any setting, be it in East Berlin laboratory where she worked, or as head of state, she's always surrounded by men, and so she's always the only woman in the room. So she's, but I have to say, this picture, it really shows a genuine affection between W and Merkel. That was one of my surprising facts that my research turned up, is that what they had, and she considered him an authentic person and a man of faith, which she is. She's a woman of faith. So
forgive me for interrupting, but on that note, I had wanted to ask you, because I know that she also had a certain affection for George H.W. Bush. And
yes.
But I didn't know if they had ever met or spent much time together, or if that how well they may have known each other.
Well, yeah, Amanda, for her, Bush the elder was an icon. She had a picture of both Reagan and the senior Bush in her office in the Chancellery, because she attributed the end of the Cold War, the unification of Germany, to their efforts, and thus, personally to her second chance. So she did meet both Reagan and met Bush 41 in the White House. There they are. That's a great one. But with the surprise for me was that W and she struck up a friendship, whereas her relationship with Obama was complicated, and it took her quite a while to warm up to him, because he excels at something that she lacks entirely, which is charisma and rhetoric. And she tends to be suspicious of people who gain power through charisma, given Germany's history of coming to bad pass at the hands of charismatic autocrats. It's understandable, and it's also understandable that the German people would be drawn to a figure such as Merkel, who is not self-involved, but is really looking at them and looking after them, not at herself. She is the most unself promoting politician that we've. But I don't want to give the impression that she's this paragon of perfection, because this is not a book that just sends her a Valentine, because I do see her blind spots, and they're outweighed by her tremendous gifts, but her blind spots are also visible today in the presence of a far right party in the German parliament, the Bundestag, for the first time, the Alternative für Deutschland, which is also a product of the Merkel era, is now seated in the parliament. However, it's not rising in the polls. On the contrary, it's dropped during COVID, because COVID has not played very well in the populists' hands, because it kind of revealed them to be, without a program or competence. Where someone like Merkel, with her training in science, has navigated COVID with far greater skill than I think almost any leader in the world.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, in addition to COVID, she has had to deal with so many different crises and events. Just to name a few, the European financial crisis, confronting Putin's invasion of Ukraine, opening Germany's borders to more than 1 million refugees, and the list goes on. I want to ask you, along with our audience member, Ray Termini, what do you think will be Angela Merkel's lasting achievement? Is it in her response to one of these events or crises that I named, or something else?
Well, it's no exaggeration to say that she has transformed her country. I alluded to that, how she's made it a much more open and tolerant place. And I first went to Germany as a young correspondent during the Cold War, when I was endlessly self-conscious for being a woman who was not somebody's assistant, living in the capital, which was then Bonn, which is where she was living also. Now it's an entirely different, it's a different country. And she has pretty well done that. And she has, I think, demonstrated, put to rest permanently any doubt about a woman's capacity to lead through all these storms. And she succeeded, not in spite of the fact that she's a woman, but this ego-free politics that I've been describing, where she doesn't take credit, where she doesn't reply to bombast with bombast, but with patience, where her it's not about her, this ego-free style of politics. I think I plead guilty to being a feminist. I think it's because she's a woman, because I would like to see men emulate her style of politics. She is the anti-demagogue. She is the voice of moderation and let's find common ground. And this is precisely what we need in our terribly fractious political environment. And I would really urge people to study her example. And she it's true that she brings a unique set of skills to the job, and it helps that she's brilliant, but that's not a handicap either. But her leadership style can easily be emulated, And by the way, it leads to success, and it leads to re-election, because people like leaders who are competent ultimately, and who are focused on them, not on themselves. You know, the fact that that she never moved out of her rent-controlled apartment in the heart of Berlin, that she does her own grocery shopping. What head of
I think we have
state?
a photo. We should show this photo of,
Yes, we've got a
Chancellor
great
Merkel.
photo.
This is at the beginning of COVID. She goes to the grocery store, which apparently she does frequently. And there she is with a basket of wine and some toilet paper there. that we all wanted.
Equal number of rolls of toilet paper and wine, which I love. But you know, this is not this is not for show. She does this every week. I've seen her shopping in Berlin. I've seen her shopping for 6 pairs of identical black flats at a department store, because she figured out that she had to dress a certain way to make what she wore a non-story. And so she always looks good. She has a closet full of jewel tone jackets and black pants. So, you know, she's extremely streamlined and practical in her personal life. For her, the idea of Merkel on a yacht, for example, is a ridiculous idea. The idea of Merkel acquiring, you know, palaces and you know, huge properties, for her, that would just slow you down, you know, having to deal with all that and maintain all that. You know, she just, but she's, by the way, I don't want to give the impression that she's this ascetic, nun-like person. She really likes to have a good time. She's, in the words of Phil Murphy, our current governor of New Jersey, who knows her well. He was ambassador to Germany. She's funny as hell. I've observed her eye rolls when some man is mansplaining to her, and it's pretty hilarious. She just so she's, in other, what I'm trying to say, Amanda, is that she's not this boring person at all. She is, she just lives by her own standards, and it's paid off not only for her, but it's paid off for Germany, which is now in a pretty good shape relative to most of the world.
You talked about Angela Merkel having some blind spots, and our audience member Howard Townsend asks, what would you consider her primary shortcomings to be? Can you talk about either shortcomings or blind spots, maybe in the context of foreign policy or domestic policy issue that she had to grapple with?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, I've alluded to the fact that she's a very poor public speaker. Which, you know, sometimes you need to rouse people to action. And she's not much good at that. She hasn't really been able to bridge the continuing divide between East and West Germany. It's an incomplete fusion. And, you know, she is East German herself originally. And because she was so nimble in transforming herself, she expected everybody else to follow her example, because East Germany was a failed state. It just collapsed. But a great many East Germans didn't. And it wasn't just the economy, stupid. It was also that they wanted to be acknowledged the way, you know, we have our own citizens who feel as if they have been left behind and by globalization and were insufficiently acknowledged for their pain and suffering. That's a problem in Germany. Much of the support for the far right comes from the East, And she was very slow to realize that those people needed more compassion, more acknowledgement. So that was a failure, and that same quality of that same blind spot was evident during the Eurozone meltdown, the financial crisis, which started in 2008, and where again, Greece, for example, was in terrible, dire straits, and she was preaching austerity at a time when Greek people were really hurting, and massive unemployment, and garbage was piling up in Athens' beautiful squares, and she was then shocked when she finally went to Athens to see herself burnt in effigy and depicted with a Hitler mustache. So there is this kind of an unattractive intolerance for people who are not as rational, let's say, as she is. She's a hyper rational person who thinks very strategically and thinks several moves down the chessboard, and expects others to as well. She gave up on Trump because she realized that he wasn't a serious player, and therefore her focus in her last years became keeping Europe united. The EU became her vision, and for her, the election of Trump was a personal blow because she so reveres this country. As I said, her heroes are among her heroes are Reagan and Bush the elder. And so for her, she explained that to herself, the election of Trump as an anomalous event that was the product of America's rather Byzantine electoral system. But I think what really upset her more recently was January 6th, because given she's a historian, she reads enormous volumes of history for pleasure still, and is therefore very familiar with the fact that the big lie is what brought Hitler to the Reichstag, the big lie being that it was the communists and the Jews who stabbed Germany in the back and caused its defeat in World War I. That catapulted Hitler to the Chancellery. And now she's very worried that although Trump has been defeated, but this big lie has not. And so she worries about that. And that was one reason why one of the final deals that she pushed through when she was in the European Council's presidency, or rotating presidency, was a deal with China, leveling it was a trade deal, but it kind of leveled the playing field between the EU and China. And the new Biden administration pleaded with her not to go ahead with that deal. Wait for us and let's negotiate together. Well, she didn't do that, which was a sign that she no longer sees the United States in quite the same position as before, as the CEO of the West, sitting at the head of the table. And for her, that's a harsh blow, because America was her North Star, and it's I don't think that she's turned anti-American, because one of her first trips will be, I think, to America when she's finally free.
Finally free. Let me ask you this, because we're down to the last minutes, and there's one excellent question in the chat that I want to ask, and that is, what do you expect Angela Merkel's role to be on the world stage after she steps down from leadership in Germany? And I'll pair to that with one other question from the chat, which is, and will her successors be able to live up to her triumphs. So maybe if you could take those two briefly. And
yes.
we'll
Okay,
probably
so
be
let
out
me
of
just
time.
say absolutely not. Her successors will not be able to, because she is such a unique personality and she brought such a unique story to the role. I mean, you know, the pastor's daughter coming from the communist state, you know, so the combination of the trained mind and the sense of morality, which impelled her to this generous refugee policy, for example. And the fact that this is a triple outsider, a woman, a scientist, and from the East who took on this male political culture without it ever knowing, without ever drawing blood, because she's a stealth politician. She works by sideways. I don't see her successors repeating her journey. It's not possible. But her successor ran as a kind of mini Merkel, and so I think Germany is in a good place. And as quickly, I know we're out of time, as to her future. She's not going to take another job after 16 years as Chancellor of Germany. What job could she possibly take? But nor will she be rushed, because she's, you know, as you know from the book, she always takes her time deciding things. But I think she will return after a good and well-deserved rest. She's free for the first time, 35 years under communist rule, 16 years as Chancellor. This will be her first taste of freedom. And I think she will savor that. And then I predict that she will return in some climate capacity, because that is one of her unfinished agenda items, because she was faced by so many crises. She didn't really fulfill that, which she feels deeply and personally committed to, which is climate change.
Thank you so much. Liz, I'll hand it over to you. There's so much more we could talk about, but thank you so much for your time and for this fascinating book.
Thank you, Amanda. I really appreciated all your wonderful questions, and I wish we had another hour.
Thank you both. That was an excellent discussion, and especially given how incredibly difficult it was to gain access and get information about this mystery of a woman, and really fascinating. So thank you so much. And I know our audience will really enjoy reading that book. But in any case, thank you. And I just want to remind our audience to check out our website at dfwworld.org to view our complete lineup, and also our COVID health and safety practices as we return to in-person events. And if you're not a member of our council yet, please join us. Truly, I'd love to see you in person. I'd love to see you at our programs. Thank you, ladies, again, and have a great evening, everyone. See you next time.